Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. So today I'm going to be talking about DCMA 14. I'm sure you've probably heard about the DCMA 14, probably in an interview or somebody talked about it, especially as it pertains to project scheduling. So here we'll talk about what DCMA 14 is all about. Then also we'll take a look at how to be able to access it using Primavera P6. So once again, my name is Obalim and I welcome you to my class. So first of all, when we talk about DCMA, DCMA simply stands for Defense Contract Management Agency. That's the full meaning of DCMA. So the DCMA is an agency in the United States Department of Defense, that's the DoD. And their job is, of course, to oversee contracts, defense contracts, making sure that projects such as aircraft, ships, weapons, air defense systems, IT projects, you name it, all of those military projects. So the DCMA responsibility is basically to make sure that those projects are delivered on time, within budget, and then also in accordance with quality standard. That's actually the function of the DCMA. And obviously, to be able to carry out all of these things or to be able to deliver all of these projects, you would need a project plan or a project schedule on the list. And that's part of the reason why DCMA is very important. So to make sure that projects are delivered on budget as well as within schedule and also in line with quality expectation, DCMA came up with 14 points, which of course is now referred to as DCMA 14. So these are more like 14-point schedule assessment. And this schedule assessment, of course, is used as a standard way to check if a contractor's project is reliable and then also realistic. So in a nutshell, they came up with these 14 points. So these 14 points have now been adopted outside of the military space. So that's now what we use to determine the health of a schedule. We use it to now determine if a particular schedule has been built up to quality standards or expectations. So the question is, how do you use the DCMA 14? So in order for you to access it within your Primavera P6, once you log in, just open any random project at all in Primavera P6. So in this case, I have a particular project open, which is the City Center Office Building project. Then go to your Tools menu. So from your Tools menu, you're going to see Check Schedule Report. Please note that this particular report, a Check Schedule Report, is available for newer versions of Primavera P6. Otherwise, for older versions, you might not see this particular feature. I think from version 20 upwards has this particular feature. So I'm using version 24. So depending on the one you're using, that probably will determine whether you would be able to view it or not. So once you go to Tools, then click on Check Schedule. So when you click on Check Schedule, you will notice that a list comes up, which is now what we refer to as the check schedule list. So these particular check schedule parameters will now help you to be able to check your schedule and determine if, yes, it meets the DCMA 14 standard. If you take a look at the items that you have here, you can see that there are 14 of them in line with the DCMA 14. And all of these items you have here are part of those standards that DCMA published that they use to check the health of a particular schedule. And that's exactly what you have here. So you see the very first one, which talks about logic. It says logic, activities with missing predecessors or successors. Then here you can see it says it should be less than 5%. It simply means that if you create a schedule, all your project activities or most of them should have predecessors or successors. So less than 5% of your project activities should not have or should have missing predecessors or successors. So what that simply means is if you have 100 activities within your schedule, just about 5 or less than 5 should have missing predecessors or successors. So the idea is basically that your activities should be linked. And that's basically what it's simply saying. So don't create a schedule and you don't have a linking for your activities or most of your activities. Because if we don't link it, we refer to it as floating task. And if tasks are floating without a link, then of course the schedule in itself cannot flow. So that's part of the reason why DCMA says that all your activities should have predecessors, or that's why DCMA, of course, says that over 95% of your activities should have predecessors as well as successors. So this is rule number 2. Rule number 2 talks about negative lags, and it pertains to relationships with a lag duration of less than 0. So first of all, what is the concept of lag? let's assume you have two activities. So this is activity A, and then also you have another activity, which is activity B. And you have determined that each of these activities will last for 5 days. If you create a start-to-start relationship between these activities, so it means that these activities will be linked in this manner. So when you create a start-to-start relationship between two activities, automatically, it is assumed that the activities will start at the same time. But sometimes we may want two activities to run concurrently, but not necessarily starting at the same time. For example, we're clearing our site and we're also doing excavating, and we want both of them to run concurrently. However, we want a situation where we would have cleared up unto a certain extent before we start excavating. So in that case, you now include what we refer to as lag. So let's assume that these activities have 5 days duration each. Okay. Now, if start to start assumes that they will start on the same day. But we want activity B to start 2 days after activity A has started, but still maintain the start-to-start relationship. So what I'm going to do is to create a relationship between activity A and B with a 2 days lag. And if we do that, our schedule will look somewhat like this. So you will notice that B has shifted rightwards. So this is now the 2 days lag here. So we're simply saying that, yes, A and B can run concurrently. However, B will start 2 days after activity A has started. So that 2 days now is what we refer to as lag in project planning. Now, the opposite of lag is now what you call a lead. So the opposite of lag is known as a lead. It therefore means that a negative lag is a lead because remember, lag is waiting time, okay? So the opposite of it is now more like ahead of time. So when we now talk about negative lag, we're basically talking about what we now refer to as leads. Now, what lead will now mean is, let's say we're creating a relationship between activity A and B with 2 days lead. We're simply saying that activity B can start 2 days before A starts. So if we take a look at the relationship, it's probably now going to appear somewhat like this. So this is now activity B, and we create a link between A and B. Don't forget that A is the predecessor, while B is the successor. So if you're putting a negative lag on B, you're simply saying that that successor will start before the predecessor. It sounds funny, right? Okay, good. So that's why DCMA says, don't create this kind of relationship. In other words, activities with a negative lag, that means activities with lead should be less than 1. What is less than 1? Anything less than 1 is 0. So in a nutshell, do not use leads within your schedule. So next, we talk about activities with positive lags. This is basically like the normal lag. So it says relationship with a positive lag duration should be less than 5%. So in a nutshell, why it is also important that you have lags, but then DCMA is simply saying that it shouldn't be more than 5%. So again, if you have 100 activities, less than 5 or less should have lags. I've explained the concept of lag, which is positive lag. I've also explained the concept of lead, which is also known as negative lag. So for positive lags, yes, it is okay to use positive lags, but don't overuse it. Less than 5% of your activities should have positive lag. I remember I said that lag is basically a waiting time between two activities. And the reason is simple. If you have activities that have too many lags, it makes the schedule hard to manage. That's part of the reason why it's quite important that you limit the amount of lags as much as possible. So the next rule talks about long lags. So it mentions that relationship with a lag duration greater than 352 hours should be less than 5%. Make sure you don't have any activity that has a lag of more than 352 hours. And if you're working 8 hours a day, let's say you're running 8 hours a day calendar, that translates into 44 days. So you shouldn't have a lag that is more than 44 days. Then the next one talks about relationship types. It says that majority of your project relationships should be finished to start. In fact, more than 90% of your project relationships should be finished to start. Remember that there are 4 relationship types in project, which are the finish to start relationship, the start to start relationship, the finish to finish relationship, and then also the start to finish relationship. The most popular relationship type in project, of course, is the finish to start relationship. That's why it's the default relationship in Primavera. Have you noticed that once you assign a relationship between 2 activities in Primavera, automatically Primavera assigns it a finish to start relationship because that's the most popular relationship type. So DCMA is saying that most of your activities should be finished to start relationship. Over 90% of your activity relationships should be finished to start. So if you have 100 activities, 90 of them or more than 90 of them, their relationships should be finished to start relationships. And the reason is because if you use too much of these other relationships, like a lot of start to start, a lot of finish to finish, and then also a lot of start to finish, your schedule will most likely be unrealistic because you're simply saying we're doing all of these things at the same time, because that's exactly what start to start and finish to finish refers to. So you're running a whole lot of items on the same time. And that would, of course, make it not to become realistic. And remember, the primary goal of the DCMA 14 is to make sure that our schedule is realistic and then also that is reliable. Then the next one talks about hard constraints. So the rule says that constraints that prevent activities from being moved. So when we talk about hard constraints are those constraints like must finish on, or mandatory finish, or must start on. So what these hard constraints do is that they force your activities to begin or finish on a particular date. So in essence, they force those activities into fixed dates. And if you use a whole lot of them, it would override the logic that you have within the schedule, and it can create fake float as well as a fake critical path because all those activities are constrained or they have hard constraints. And that's one of the reason why it's probably going to make your schedule not to be realistic, because the critical path you're going to have will be greatly doctored. And DCMA says avoid them as much as possible. So in a nutshell, don't even use hard constraints. It should be less than 1%. So let me clear this real quick. Then we now talk about soft constraints. These are constraints that do not prevent activities from being moved. Constraints like start on or after, finish on or after, start on or before, finish on or before. All of these are what we refer to as soft constraints. Even though they are softer than the hard constraints, at least with the way it sounds. So they are softer than the hard constraints, but then they still distort the natural flow of your schedule. Notice that when you're creating your schedule and you have, say, for example, activity A, and activity A will take 5 days, then if activity B is dependent on A, so you have a link here between activity A and B. So this is activity B, and let's say activity B will last for 4 days. So you can see this is the natural flow of things. You can see it means that B is going to start once on this date when A has finished. That's the natural way it flows. So whenever you're creating a relationship, that's how it should flow. So that's why when we talk about natural flow, we're basically saying that it should flow in that particular order. But if you begin to put hard constraints, you're not saying that. But if you begin to put hard constraints, you're now saying that, okay, I want B to begin on a particular date, say, for example, on the 3rd day. So this is now what is going to be the hard constraint. That's what we call a must start on date. So you can see it has distorted the natural flow of things. So that's one of the reason why DCMA is suggesting the hard constraints, do not use them as much as possible. And even if you're using soft constraint, even though it's softer, soft constraint gives you some room to also make some adjustments. For example, start on or after, or finish on or before, okay? So even though you can also use that, but it should be less than 5%. So in essence, if you have 100 activities, less than 5 of them should have soft constraints. Then the next one talks about large float. So activities with total float greater than 352 hours. Remember, we said for 8 hours work week, 352 hours loosely translates into 44 days. So what this is simply saying is that don't have too much large float. Remember what a float is? When we talk about float is how long you can delay an activity without impacting the finished date of the project. That's exactly what we refer to as float. So you shouldn't have any activity that you can delay up to 44 days and it will not affect the finished date of the project. If that happens, it means the float is very, very large. It's too large. So let's say, for example, because sometimes I see some schedules, some persons, their float will be 200 days. And you'll be wondering, why would you have a 200 days float, for example? So this simply means that your logic is weak. So a good schedule shouldn't have so many activities like this, if at all it should. And that's why DCMA says it should be less than 1%. In other words, next to zero. Don't have any activity at all with a total float more than 44 days. The next one talks about negative float. So remember we mentioned that float is how long you can delay an activity without impacting the finished date of the project. Let's assume we have two activities, activities A and B, and we have determined that A will last for 5 days and B will last for 2 days. These two activities run concurrently. So in essence, they run in parallel. They have start-to-start relationship. So the Gantt chart for both activities will look somehow like this. So this is activity A with 5 days duration. This is activity A. And then this will now be activity B with 2 days duration. So this is our activity B with 2 days duration. Remember, it's a start-to-start. So I create the arrow showing that this is a start-to-start relationship. So it means that between A and B, there's a difference of 3 days. So both activities will finish on the 5th day. So it means that for me to finish activities A and B, it's going to take me 5 days to finish both activities A and B. Activity A, B will finish on the 2nd day, while activity A would finish on the 5th day. So the activity A will now be the critical path. Remember, the critical path is the path with the longest duration. So the activity B will now fall on what we refer to as the float path. That is the non-critical path. This is the path where you can actually delay the activity up until a certain point and it will not affect when the project will finish. For example, we can delay this activity B up to 3 days and still finish on the 5th day because it takes only 2 days out of the 5 days. So that number of days in this case, which is 3, that we can delay activity B without impacting the finished date of the project, that's what we call your total float. So you see where the word total float comes in. So we're now saying that activities within your project shouldn't have more than 44 days total float. That's exactly what this one is talking about, that talked about large float. Then you now have what we call negative float. So in negative float is the opposite of your total float. Negative float simply means that this activity has a deadline that is even earlier than the logic. It simply means that this activity has a deadline that is even earlier than the logic allows. As how now? So you notice that, this is practically impossible. So you say, for example, a particular task needs 15 days to be done, but the deadline is 10 days. So in this case, you have a negative 5 days float. So it simply means we should go and look for where to get 5 days to add, which is not possible because the deadline is 10 days, but we require 15 days to perform that particular activity. Negative float should not even exist at all in your schedule. Again, I see a lot of schedules. Some schedule you see minus 200 negative float. You will see 100 negative float. Some you will see 300 negative float. I kept wondering, you have a deadline that is 200 days behind, and you have an activity that is supposed to outlast the deadline of the project by 200 days. That really sounds ridiculous. So that's why DCMA says don't even have negative float at all. Then the next one talks about the duration of your activities. So this talks about long durations, especially for people who have activities, 100 days activities, 200 days activities, 70 days activities. So you can see it here. DCMA is simply saying that your activities shouldn't be more than 352 hours in duration. In other words, no activity should be longer than 44 days. 8 hours a day, 5 days work week calendar. Also, don't forget that this 44 days loosely translates to 2 months. So in a nutshell, don't have any activity that will last for more than 2 months. Having an activity that will last for more than 2 months, of course, proves that it is very risky. So in a nutshell, if you have an activity that will last more than 2 months, break it down further. That activity needs further decomposition. So look for a way to further decompose or break down that activity to a smaller number of days. This will help you to make it much more manageable. Come on, it's an activity, it's not a project now. How can one activity itself take you 100 days? When there are some major projects that we do in less than 100 days, especially if you're running an agile project. So please, if you have all those large chunks of activities, DCMA is simply saying, please break down your project activities into small manageable chunks, because the smaller they are, the easier it is to manage the activities. Then the next one talks about activities with invalid progress dates. This is also another place you need to pay attention. Invalid progress date. Don't forget, when you finish your schedule, you begin to now enter the progress date. That is, you start entering when the activity has started and then also when the activity has finished. And that's what we refer to as the progress date. So you start entering the start date, the finish date of the activities. Now, let's assume that you have activity A. So let me clear my screen real quick. So let's assume that we have activity A. And activity A is supposed to start on the 1st and finish on the 5th. And today is 3rd. Don't forget, today, okay, let me use month to illustrate. This is activity A. This is the month of August. So activity A, we plan to start it on the 1st of August and then finish it on the 5th of August. And we're doing a progress report today. And let's assume today is 3rd of August. So you're doing a progress report, reporting actuals within your activities. And then in that actual report, we now reported that activity A has finished, but then it finished on, let's assume, on the 7th of August. Or that it finished, okay, let's even assume it finished on the 5th of August, which is, of course, the expected finish date. But don't forget, we're not in 5th of August yet. Today is 3rd of August, and you've reported that activity A finished on the 5th of August. That is a typical example of what we refer to as invalid progress date. You are finishing an activity in the future that we have not even gotten to. You have finished the activity. Please note, this is different from finishing the activity ahead of schedule. If we finish the activity on the 2nd or on the 3rd, that's still okay, because remember, we're assuming today is 3rd. But you cannot be on the 3rd of August and you're reporting that an activity finished on the 5th of August, or that an activity finished on the 10th of August. Meanwhile, today is still 3rd of August. We've not even gotten to 4th or 5th, not to talk about 10th of August, and you're saying that this activity has finished on the 10th of August. That's a typical example of what we refer to as activities with invalid progress date. Don't even try it at all. So in a nutshell, less than 1%, which is 0, none of your activities should have invalid progress dates because this would affect the integrity of your schedule. It simply means that you're simply entering spurious data within your schedule. So the next one talks about resources and cost. And it says that activities that do not have an expense or resource assigned should be less than 1%. So DCMA is simply saying that every activity should have a responsibility. I mean, that's logical now. You have an activity. So, I mean, there should be somebody that will do that particular activity. So if you have an activity and it's not assigned to anybody, that in itself is a problem. And the implication is that you may likely overlook that particular activity, especially during executing. So you have an activity, it doesn't have resource, it doesn't have cost. activities cost money. So if there's no budget for the activity, there's no resource for the activity, there's a chance or a likelihood that the activity may be overlooked in the course of the executing. That's essentially why DCMA is simply saying that all your activities should have resources and then also costs assigned to them. The next one is what we refer to as late activities. These are activities scheduled to finish later than the project baseline. Baseline simply means we have taken a snapshot of the project. In essence, you finish your planning, so you take a snapshot of your plan, you lock it in before you start executing, so that when you start executing, you can be comparing the actual against the baseline. That's the baseline plan. You have 10 activities. All of them are already exceeding the baseline. That's a red flag. It means that this particular schedule is not even progressing well at all. None of it is going according to schedule. So if you have too many activities that are slipping by, it simply means that the schedule is not being followed. I mean, that's the implication. So why develop the schedule in the first place if you're not going to be following the schedule? That's exactly what DCMA is saying, that make sure that less than 5% of activities should have a finish date later than the project baseline. Don't have yes, we know we have a baseline, but every activity there has exceeded the baseline and you're not even worried about it. It simply means the schedule is just for decoration. A lot of organizations actually do it maybe because it's part of a provision of a contract, or NEC has said you should build a schedule, but they don't even follow the schedule at all. And then you will see a lot of negative float. You will see a lot of activities running behind schedule and nobody is worried about it. That, of course, shows that that particular schedule doesn't meet the DCMA check schedule health parameters. And then the final one is what we refer to as the BEI, which is the Baseline Execution Index. So basically, the Baseline Execution Index measures how well you are sticking to the baseline. Remember, I've talked about the concept of the baseline earlier on. So how well you're sticking to the baseline is what the BEI, that is the Baseline Execution Index, measures. So let's say, for example, we plan that 100 activities should be finished as at 3rd of August. But then as at 3rd of August, you have 80% of activities that were finished. It means that your BEI is 0.8. But then DCMA is simply saying that at every point in time, your BEI should be greater than 0.95. In essence, 0.95 is the minimum. So anytime you calculate your BEI and is less than 0.95, it simply means you are not sticking with the baseline. So that's essentially the interpretation of the DCMA 14, and I hope you've been able to better appreciate what those rules are and essentially what each of these points actually stands for. So you can see it's a very good way to measure the quality of the schedule that you built, and then also ensure that your schedule is realistic and it is reliable. So remember how we ran this report? So just in case you've forgotten, let's quickly repeat that again. Make sure you have a project open, then go to your tools bar, then don't forget, click on the check schedule report. Then it will pop up your check schedule. So in order to now run the report, you simply click the check schedule button. And then, just click on OK. So once you do that, it will generate the check schedule report. Usually, it will save it in your document folder or whichever default folder you have in your computer. Then, if I open the report, exactly this is what I see. So we have done the check schedule report for this particular project that I currently have open, and this is the report that we are presented with. So let's now interpret this report. If you notice, the project here is the City Center Office Building Project. That's exactly the project that I'm using for the purpose of this illustration. That's why you're seeing the name of the project showing up here. Then you can see the check schedule report. So this is the summary of all of those reports. So for the logic, you can see the rule says the target is less than 5%. But then in this case, this schedule is about 5.17. So this is quite close, but it should be less than 5%. So that's why it marked it in red. Activities with negative lags, here, no activity at all was found to have negative lags. So that is very okay. Then activities with positive lags, with a duration, activities with a positive lag duration, of course, more than 352 hours should be less than 5%. In this case, I have about 7, which is about 7.61%. So you can see it's more than the stipulation. Then also, the other ones here, including relationships with lag greater than 352 days, none. So that's why it's green. So this is okay. Majority of my activities here are finished to start relationship. This is okay. Hard constraints, I didn't use anyone, which is okay. Soft constraints, none was used, which is also very okay. Activities with total float more than 352 hours, I have about 37 of them. So it should be less than 1%. And this, my schedule is reading about 63%. So that's why it's colored red. Then activities with a total float of less than 0 should also be less than 1. But here we have about 15 of them. So again, that's why it's red. Then the next one too is also red, which is activities with a remaining duration greater than 352 hours. Then incomplete activities before the data date. This one is very okay. And so in a nutshell, I don't have any invalid progress, either before the data date. And then, of course, there's an invalid progress here, which are activities with actual dates that's after the data date, about 9 of them. And then resources and costs. I have about 4 activities here that don't have resources and costs. Also, late activities, about 40 activities here are late out of a total of 49. So this schedule that I just ran a check schedule report is simply showing that many of the aspects of this schedule is actually in red. Of course, it's a sample project from Primavera. That's actually what we're using for the purpose of this check schedule report that we're doing right now. And then it also calculates the BEI. So the BEI is 0. So the BEI for this project is 0.64. And remember, I said that your BEI should be greater than 0.95. In other words, the minimum BEI you should have 0.95 or higher. So anything less than that actually shows that we're not doing well as far as this schedule is concerned. So the top part gives you of that report is the summary. If you now take a look down below, it will now give you a detailed explanation of each and list all of those affected activities for you, one after the other in each category. So you can take your time and take, go through them. So if you notice those ones that it mentions 9 activities, it will list all of those 9 activities and show you whether it is, for example, this one that talks about relationship types. So you can see it's showing all the ones with finish to start, start to start, where majority of them should be finish to start, but it's not showing you all your finish to finish and start to start relationships. So that's what you see down below. It just gives you like a detailed analysis of those summary that you have up there. So in this case, you can see again here, activities with large total float. So you can see it has identified all those activities and it will list all of them to you and give you their hours of total float for each activity. So anyone at all that it identifies or it paints red, it will list the activities or the impacted or affected activities. So the idea is you can take a look at the activities from here and go and make relevant adjustments. So we know that these are activities that have large total float, and we now go back and start amending them one after the other. However, it's probably going to be very difficult for you to always come back here and pick whichever activity and go and make your correction. So in order to fix that, Primavera also has another feature. So Primavera also has another feature, which you're also going to take a look at right away. The feature is under the View menu. So if you click on View, you're also going to see we have Check Schedule there. And when you go to Check Schedule, you will see all of those items again that we have here. So the essence of this particular Check Schedule under View is now to help you to filter. So for example, we had activities with a lot of relationship type issues when we saw the report. So instead of me going to the report and picking the activity one after the other and coming back to my schedule to check, I can simply come to my View menu, go to Check Schedule, then click this relationship type. It will filter out other activities and I'll be left with only those activities that have either start to start or finish to start relationship. That's exactly what this does. Again, if I want to see another one, which is, for example, activities that have missing logic, I select logic and it filters. So you can see these are the activities that have missing logic, just about three or so. So that's essentially what you do from Vue. So once you're able to do that, it takes you directly to those activities where you have issues. And then once you're there, you can make relevant adjustments, or you can now begin to work on those activities in order to comply with the DCMA 14. So once again, I hope this particular explanation was quite informative for you. So especially for the purpose of your interviews, you probably get to hear questions like, what is DCMA 14 schedule assessment and why is it important? So you notice I've taken time to explain it and told you the reason why it's important. It helps in reliability and ensure that your schedule is realistic. Then you might also see question, who developed the DCMA 14? Remember we said is the Defense Contract Management Agency, which is an agency under the United States Department of Defense, DoD. Then you may also get questions like, how do you run DCMA 14 check in Primavera P6? I mean, it's really straightforward. You simply go to your tools menu, then click on your check schedule report. And you may also want to let them know that you're grounded in this, because I expect you to be grounded and I really want you to get that job. So you can go further to tell them that after running the report, you can go to your view menu in order for you to narrow down and filter based on specifics. In other words, anyone that you have issues. Okay, let me clear this filter. Remember we filtered the last time. I think we left it at logic. So I've cleared the filter, so I have all my schedule back. So how to clear it is you go back to view, click on the last one that you clicked to filter. Then sometimes you may also have questions that, of course, revolve around each of those points in your DCMA. So take time to watch the videos and understand them very, very well. You can watch the videos repeatedly and understand each of those points that I've explained, so that in case they ask you any question, and to be honest with you, understanding those 14 points also gives you a summary of project scheduling. I hope this video was quite informative for you. Thank you once again for listening. And if you need a one-on-one coaching, you can always contact me with a WhatsApp number that you have down below. I also have my very course on Udemy. I also have my courses on Udemy. So if you're looking at building your capacity as a planner, you can please buy my course. Don't forget to also subscribe to this particular YouTube channel. And you can also become a member of this very YouTube channel. And that, of course, will be highly appreciated. Buy us a cup of coffee. And indeed, we'll be glad that you did. See you in the next video.